Are you ready?
We are. Are you? I guess.
am.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All ready.
So
The audience is ready.
the audience is super ready.
They
They're
should be ready.
psyched. They've been hyped all day, screaming things out.
It's all the Red Bull.
Yeah, it's all the rest. First, I'd like you guys, if possible, to just say one word about yourself and what your name is, maybe, what you do, kind of thing. Is that fair?
Sure.
Relatively reasonable request?
Yeah, very quickly.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I'm a lecturer researcher at École de Guerre Économique in Paris. I'm a contributor to the academic journal of the INSS, Institute for National Security Studies in Israel on cyber warfare studies. I'm also an advisor to PwC. And I'm a fiction writer, which is the actual reason why I got into cybersecurity.
Huh. That's really interesting, actually. Cool, thank you.
You're welcome.
My name's Shane. I'm from Ireland, running a company called Evervault. We used to be called Muon before. For legal reasons, we had to change. And I'm a failed rugby player as well. I wanted to become professional, but that didn't work out. I got injured too much.
This is like, nobody has mentioned their fiction writing love or their rugby career before. This is great.
The pressure's on you now.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm only the CTO, so very boring. And I'm a teacher at Amsterdam University for cybersecurity, so also very boring. Disappointment again, but I hope to make it up later.
Did you win a Nobel Prize or something? No?
No?
No.
Yeah, in boredom.
No fun fact about
Cybersecurity is, of course, exciting, but
And fun.
It's fun for us,
Yeah.
less for the victims, of course.
Awesome. So the topic is technology ever going to be safe? And this was really interesting to me because I interact with technology fairly often, and I haven't yet been slapped in the face by my iPhone kind of thing. So I guess the first question to pose is, what, when it comes to technology, does safe mean? Or what is it that we're afraid of? And yeah.
So very briefly, I think it's a very important question because indeed in cybersecurity you cover lots of type of different risks. That's why I try to touch very briefly on my presentation at one. Most of the time when you talk about cybersecurity is about losing money, basically. Or a company losing the confidence of investors, AI losing money. And that's a big issue that can be actually quantified. But now we see, because we're moving into even more complex cyber-physical systems and even robotic system, that actually what you could potentially have as an impact is not to lose money, but to lose or endanger lives. And I believe that when we'll reach, unfortunately, to that level, it will change the whole ballgame in the discussion that we have with regards to cybersecurity. Because as we've seen in the past with, say, airlines, where there were first fatalities and then it changes the regulations, or as we've seen with cars, when we started to have a lot of fatalities and then we started to impose, for example, safety belt by the mid-60s and early 70s, the moment, unfortunately, we may have fatalities, which I hope we will not have, but if we really reach to that point, then you'll see that the whole discussion about cybersecurity is going to change in terms of regulation, cost imposed to companies, and so forth.
Yeah, I'd probably approach that question a little bit more holistically and basically say that technology should become sort of an inherent part of life without posing any additional threats just because of its existence. So if you look at companies like Smith & Wesson, I don't want to turn this into a debate about the US Second Amendment or any of this sort of stuff, but I mean, you don't want to be at a stage where technology is sort of the thing that provokes either things like fatality or sort of threat to human life, but at the same time, it shouldn't be hindered just as a result of the security itself, because there's obviously kind of great benefits to various technologies out there, and things like large-scale data sets and stuff are really, really useful, but it shouldn't be an autonomous weapon, if that makes sense. It should be still firmly within the grasp and control of individuals, but without sacrificing quality and advancement of the technology itself.
Huh. So you're saying that maybe it's not so much about the inherent danger of technology, but the people who create it and for what purpose?
Ideally.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'll give you the opportunity to.
Yeah, maybe it's the purpose of the creation. Yeah, that's a possibility. But I think it's a bit of a mixed question. We have such an adverse reaction to machines today that I wonder why we don't have that reaction to a car. A car can be a murder weapon as well, but it can safely drive you from A to B, and it also can kill you on the road from A to B, depending how you drive. There is a lot of protection mechanisms in a car or in any device today, the only protection I've never seen is the one against stupidity. And of course, that's a very blunt remark, but most of the things that go wrong are due to human behavior. And the wrong, making wrong assumptions at the wrong time, which creates then afterwards we say unsafe technology. But yeah, of course, technology is not safe, it's not fail-proof, but we can live with it. Nothing is fail-proof. Society can be a dangerous and hostile environment as well. So we need to balance the risks, how far we can go, and we must make it as safe as possible.
That's a very interesting, important point indeed, that we have many things which are common to our lives, which can be extremely dangerous, as you pointed out with cars, and we don't care. And we have this bizarre way of measuring risks. Like when if it's common, it's okay, people can die. Like, for example, in the military, it's okay, people can die. In healthcare, it's old people, they can die.
Yeah.
It should be revolting. But this is the way that we think about normal life. And whenever there's something new, then wow, we have to be extremely careful. Oh my God. Especially, for example, with robots.
Yeah.
You know, robots are going to take over the world, they're new. Well, the robots don't kill so far, not at all. But still, we have this very strong, bad perception of risk. And it goes to, indeed, whenever we are in this evolving technological world, this man-made environment where we build up for ourselves, we still don't have the technology of really appreciating risks. And that's a big issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then I feel like maybe there's not so much to discuss in the way of like, is technology safe right now, but is there things that you see in the future that could become dangerous or unsafe, in whether in your particular fields or elsewhere?
Well, there are probably some parts in the artificial intelligence world where we need to be careful, especially if we make them, like the former interviewee said, if my robot becomes too intelligent, then it can become an imminent danger for society. Of course, in his business environment, he wouldn't create those, but there are environments where I can think of that it might be very interesting. From the moment that we lose control on anything of the technology, I think that is the moment where we need to really ask ourselves, do we go one step too far here, and are we creating a dangerous situation? If I recall, Google did a test where they had 3 machines communicating. In fact, 2 had to communicate, and the third one had to intercept or decrypt that communication. And these 2 machines talking to each other developed over time an encryption mechanism that nobody could control. Then I also agree that might not be the best situation. We as humans need to be in control. But we don't have to go further than that or get in panic mode now, because that exists. If we can control it, I'm fine.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the words you mentioned there is control. Kind of the angle that I'm coming from this at is on the data privacy side. I think data is kind of the fuel that drives a lot of these advancements in technology, particularly artificial intelligence, whether it's autonomous cars where the information mightn't necessarily be personal information, whether it's it's generally sort of environmental. But if you're looking at things which are inherently personal, things like medical records, even bank transaction history, like to find out your sort of financial interests, that's just really, really dangerous. And right now, as it stands, the control of that has been lost by individuals. It's effectively run by companies who take this data, and as soon as you give it to these companies, you've effectively lost autonomy over that. And I think that's something it's sort of at the forefront of people's minds now, and it's something they know they need to address. But as it stands, the technology just isn't there, because all the really, really smart people are focused on building the things that are using this data to advance the world, and there's not very many people focusing on how to be kind of thread the needle between technological advancement and protection of personal data. And there is a bit of a culture shift now, and people are starting to focus on that. But I think it's a matter of time before people realize that, okay, this is a major problem and much bigger than we had ever imagined it to be. And then people start going into it. And it's already starting to happen now, but we're a while away from it yet. That's what I'm doing as well. So I'm trying to start the shift.
It's indeed a very big issue which is being discussed here. You have this dialogue between the user and the machine, but so that there is a machine, there needs to be a user in control, because if the user is not in control, it's not a machine anymore. It's an accident. And what we have not focused enough is we've put all the technology on the machine, We have not put the technology on how the user can be a better user, how the user can control himself or herself, or control itself as a society. And that's a big issue because, as mentioned, it's either because the user actually don't know exactly how it works or doesn't have the cognitive abilities to understand all that is going to happen, or is too overwhelmed, say, by emotional situation and don't control his whole emotional environment. Or if you take that at the organizational level, we don't understand exactly how we really run a society, a group of human users, and then it goes into extremism and big issues. And we do need actually today, because again, all that we're talking about and all the big dangers that we are facing with, including global warming, but also the issue of, say, escaping AI or escaping weapon systems, is all man-made. We need an industrial technological revolution in better control of ourselves. And not only with, say, meditation and things like that, but perhaps a better understanding of our own personal psychology, a better understanding, if we could, of our societal dynamics, so that we can better harness ourselves to not being, ever just overwhelmed by the complexity of things, overwhelmed by the complexity of our emotions, and always keep critical reasoning for long-term good as our main objective, which is something that it's very hard to do right now.
Yeah.
Interesting. I want to promote arguments and disagreements, by the way. That's what I like to see, is if you guys want to duke it out, that's great for me. You mentioned data and kind of how that's really your sphere of expertise, and I'm curious, how do we, the broader question is, what kind of provisions are necessary to put in place in order to maintain safety, and which ones hinder the innovation that kind of people maybe who attend a conference like Robotex are hoping to strive for? And how do we thread the needle between innovation and safety, or fear and pushing boundaries?
Yeah, I'll take that, I guess.
Yeah,
it's a broad, open question, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the approaches so far have been pretty much entirely legislative. You've got things like GDPR happening in Europe. It was a massive buzzword for about a year. It still is, even though it's meant to be implemented already. And that's what, I think it's a mindset thing, and that people who, we'll say people on the experimental end of technology, are focused on building things, and they don't really think about the long-term ramifications of what they're building, unless they're part of a larger kind of cohesive entity or company. If you're working for Google, you're probably concerned about the long-term ramifications of what you're building. But if you're doing some open source project, you just want to make something really quickly that solves a problem. So legislators think that developers obey the law, and they actually read about, they read the entire 2,000-page European Union directive about data privacy and how that can be implemented. But I personally think the best way to do it is through sort of making it a necessary component of applications through technology, and using the technology itself as the bit that draws the boundaries and sort of confines data to where it should be, rather than trying to set the laws in the legal system, hope that companies abide by them, and then have to deal with the kind of aftermath and the mess of litigation or whatever if there is a dispute over whether a particular company implemented it properly. Whereas if there's one sort of canonical or one kind of unified platform that ensures that the data remains private, it's really, really hard to kind of disagree with that, because everyone is sort of harmoniously interoperating with each other, and all these other companies are, and they don't have to worry about the actual after effects of that. So I think that's something that's starting to happen, is the technology is replacing legislation in certain places, but it's really, really hard to do through commercialization, because generally you're confined to one particular market, and if you've got to run a company, you have to worry about raising money through venture capital or even through private equity or debt or whatever. So if you're trying to raise money and you're sort of trying to solve a holistic goal, it's a real challenge. But then on the other hand, you've got academic projects from universities, which, they're getting funding from government agencies to carry out their projects, but they're 2-year projects or 3-year projects. It's really difficult. I think given the nature of the problem that data privacy is, it's like a 10 or 20-year play. And just the actual logistics and kind of, how you actually go about doing that is really, really hard to do long term. And it comes back to business. It's a money problem, basically. And some VCs are starting to kind of become aware of that, but it's still a challenge.
Yeah, but the thing with data, and especially data privacy or privacy in itself, is first of all, we have used it as a currency. Privacy is not a currency. If you buy something with privacy, like you do with Facebook, for example, well, you cannot get back your privacy. Normally, if I buy something with money, I have a money-back guarantee. Unfortunately, with privacy, once out there, it's lost. And I think your solution solves a part of the equation. That's very good, of course. The thing is that we are not able to convince users to control it better. That's the biggest fear I see with GDPR. It looks very good on paper. In reality, it looks a lot different, and there are many questions popping up which remain in a gray zone. Nobody really knows the answer. It remains always difficult, and of course, the purists will say, yeah, but it's black and white. Business is never black and white. There's always something to say about it. So that's definitely a big issue and a concern for the future. I don't know how we are going to solve it. Solutions like the one from Chain will definitely help. Maybe we need to think about how we are getting control and how can I make an access list that I know which data is where, but then is the user able to do that? And then we come back to the statement of Philip, saying, yeah, well, technology needs to make us better and not the other way around. And today I don't see that. If we take privacy and technology, I don't see how it made me better. And I don't know why. I'm an old guy, so when I started with internet, nobody used this real name. The real name usage and privacy-sensitive data started with Facebook. That's how I see it. Before, we all had nicknames on everything that we did. And Facebook came along and suddenly, oh no, we're going to put all our privacy-sensitive data in there. Very strange, but I don't know why and how they were able to convince it. And I sincerely hope that we, on the other side, like people like you, get to the moment where we can convince business to do what you were telling.
Yeah, I think really concisely, one of the things that Peter Thiel said, being on the board of Facebook, is just pretty much one sentence, is that individuals care about data privacy, but none of them care about it enough to do anything about it, which is something that even Facebook are struggling with. And I don't have any further comment on that. Peter Thiel sort of summed it up pretty well. But it's clear that even companies like Facebook are starting to be concerned about it, as well as Google and all the other companies. But they just don't know what to do, and they're kind of up in arms about it and trying to figure it out.
It seemed like you had a thought there.
Yeah, because indeed, one of the main issues here is control. And you don't have control if you have incomplete information, right? If you don't know what is going on, you don't have control. You may have fear, which is one way of being very careful and so forth. But then we've been taught as users over the last 20 years that we need to take that technology because it's good. Okay, so taking on the face of it, I take the technology, but I can't really know what's going to happen. I don't have the model of that. And that is actually quite important. I've been running a couple of war games where some guys would be playing actually the public, the audience. And whenever I would frame the role as to the public is not really inquisitive, doesn't really want to know, doesn't know, what would happen is that I would be in a say, cyber war game state where you'd have more and more of corrupting behaviors taking place. And then, slowly, step by step, a sort of disruption of trust, because I would actually mimic some sort of environment with competitors, with state, with the public, and also with hackers. It's very fun. And then, so for a long period of the game, I would have this type of stasis, where you would have the public, the consumer doesn't know really what's going on, and then all of a sudden, at some point, realizing, holy crap, personal data can be used against me by, say, identity theft, or I can be actually manipulated by, say, the Russians on some of the things. And it's only at this moment of realization that things cracks down, but when it's been built on an ever-going corrupt environment, what we've seen in those games is that actually all of a sudden you have a collapse of trust. So the key thing here to get control is to have an educated user. And that requires also for the users, because it's very hard and costly to be educated and to be trained. So either the sort of training is being financed by, say, the state or some of the guys, or you have the tools. And one of the tools may be the development of modelization that each one of users and citizens would have to try to understand exactly what is going on. So I'm going a bit sci-fi here. But I truly believe that there's a place of regulated technology, because at the end of the day, we need to know why we're doing that, and that needs to be part of a social dialogue, which will be regulated by parliaments. But so that we have control, because you would have tools that is going to help us understand, well, if I give that, then I have a higher risk of having actual identity theft or actual manipulation. Just like what you find in the right organization that have the right enterprise risk management, where you go from the risk mapping to actually understand this risk, how it's going to impact, and what will be the cost. So what we do for the largest companies, we need now to be doing it for the users, because there are active users in this technology development. And that's a big challenge, but it's both a technological challenge. It's a way to, again, increase the mindset. And as mentioned, it needs to be regulated at the end of the day, because it needs part of a common dialogue.
I think it's interesting that we kind of started with everything is relatively safe, we think, like Smith & Wesson, for example, was created with the intention that it can create damage, whereas technology, for the most part, we hope, is created to make us better. And now it's come full circle in the sense that we do see lots of things happen that are dangerous, even if they weren't intended to be. Is it too late at some point? Can we reverse this?
It's never too late. But we need to be careful. The only time it will be too late is if we go, that's part of the scenarios that have been written, so I'm sorry, but you go from cyber conflict to escalation into potential nuclear conflict, and then it's too late because there's no any other human beings. So bad, too bad. We had our chance, we missed it. That's one thing. But again, if we have more inquisitive users and we help them, actually it's one of the big transformations that needs to happen. We talk a lot, or people talk a lot, rightly so, about lifelong training, because we are entering this new transformative technological world where you just cannot stop education after you're 18 years old. It will happen all your life through. One element of that will be to be a better citizen. One element of that will be to be a better user of technology. And for that, there are many different ways to do that. I mentioned tools that you can simulate the environment, but simply put, and I put back my cap of writer, use imagination, play, organize play. There's been some university in the US where they organize war games, so that people who had no idea about diplomacy or foreign affairs stuff, which usually is not top of mind of any electors, at least in the US, they do that, and then they start having very reasonable arguments about that. So we do need to engage the users of technology. We do need to engage the voters. It's an old story. Plato was already talking about that in the Republic, back 2,500 years ago. But now we really need to do that, because again, it's a man-made environment, and each one of us was responsible for it.
I think you made the right statements. I can only second that. The danger is, and that is very unfortunate that we see, some state-sponsored organizations hunt for bugs, and for the sake of society, instead of releasing them and making society better, they keep them to abuse it for years. And we know which ones. I won't mention any names. You can easily look it up with what I say. But that I find disturbing. Technology is there to help us and to make society move around, and some, of course, see the darker side. And if we do not get control on that, that will be, of course, dangerous. And the next thing that I see where we are really playing with the limits of privacy and maybe undermining society as a whole is when states or governmental bodies say that we need backdoors in technology. This is, of course, the most stupid thing that you can do. There is no reasonable explanation why you should do that. Now, if you don't believe me, install a backdoor in your house, please. Create one, and we will see where it gets you. Please do so. So if you're a strong believer of governmental backdoors, I really urge you to install a backdoor on your alarm system and preferably connect it on Facebook or whatever social media so that everybody knows it. Yeah. So then I'm fine with it. But unless you agree with the fact not doing that, then we need to revolt against it very hard, because this is undermining society as a whole. Of course, for those that know me, I'm not such a strong believer in the word privacy as such. I don't think it ever existed. When we didn't have technology, we had societal control, which undermined privacy as we like to define it today. That doesn't mean that you have the right to protect something that is between you and your partner or between you and nobody else, and that should never be undermined regardless what technology we use.
Can I, so you wanted to have a bit of a fight, but just a very nice one.
It doesn't sound like a fight.
There's an interesting debate. So you're talking about backdoors. There's a question, for example, when you want to establish justice, which is necessary to stop crimes and to convict people and perhaps also to transform people who did bad things to make them better citizens. At least you need to identify the right guys. And the way justice functions in our Western world is by trying to find the truth, how elusive it is, but to go into this elucidation process that starts with police forces and then go into the controversial debate at the jury, at the lawsuit and process time. If we cannot access some level of information, we cannot establish really what happened. If we cannot establish really what happened, then we cannot establish justice, and that's an issue. Now, I hear what you say, and one way to think about it is to try to create this type of say, graduation that the bigger the crime and the bigger for society the crime, and this is actually what happens already in law enforcement, the bigger the crime, so then the wider we are going to attract information. And mind you, still police forces in Western societies, unfortunately in other ones, can still go in your place physically to look for documents. And they are entitled to do that, for example, for big crimes. And again, so the key thing is to really have in mind that there's a gradation on things. And if it's a small crimes, there's some information that shouldn't be accessible. And if it's a big crime, and not even to mention, say, a terrible terrorist attack, so then we have to have the ability to get more information. Now, I'm saying that in Western societies or societies that still want to keep rule of law elements.
Yeah.
And evidently, I would have this talk 10 years ago. There's some scenarios that maybe we wouldn't think of, which unfortunately are taking place now, even in so-called Western world. So indeed, now we have to be even more careful about this.
Yeah, I agree, of course. Before we had physical punishment with the yellow pages. Both are not there anymore. We can't use physical punishment, and yellow pages have disappeared. But to make it simple, if you use encryption, and normally in the case of justice, if you're not willing to cooperate with law enforcement and give them access to the data, you get into other trouble. That's something completely different as creating backdoors. I can decide if I'm a criminal to shut up and not reveal anything, and then you prosecute me for whatever I did. But I also must have protection as a normal citizen who is not engaged in criminal activity to decide, okay, this you don't need this, so I'm willing to give up some, but not all. And I'd like to know when I do that. Of course, I agree with you. It's a big debate, but organized crime in Italy managed for years to stay under the radar because they have their own way of communicating, and they don't use high tech, that's for sure.
True.
I think it's also a function of what proportion of the data being used is digital and what proportion is just something traditional that an ordinary police person from 20 years ago would use. So like, you know, having a court order to be able to enter someone's property, I don't think is something that's going to be addressed through GDPR. I guess in theory it probably is in breach of GDPR, even if it depends on kind of what the overarching ability of the state or the particular kind of jurisdiction that you're in is. Yeah. But I don't think there's very many cases where digital data is actually used in, certainly in criminal law, maybe in civil law it's used a little bit more. But you know, from an evidentiary perspective, it's almost entirely dependent on witness statements and this sort of thing. And that's very, very difficult to, I mean, you can't brainwash people, or you can't remove information from people's brains just yet. Unless you like knock them out and make them, I don't know, unconscious and forget it or whatever and give them a concussion. But I don't know, like maybe in terrorism, in that case, the information is there and it's, you know, with the the Boston bombings, for example, that was entirely data-driven and sort of from the public. But that information wasn't browsing people's Facebook messages. That was people who sent in videos from the public. It was people who just gave in anonymous tips and this sort of stuff. I mean, I don't know. I'm not involved in a police force, but I suspect that they're not overly dependent on the technology just yet.
And you're absolutely right. And that's why also we have to have these debates, because we shouldn't absolutely release all data. That should be absurd. And we do have to have this economy of data with regards to the type of cases we need to prosecute. And the key thing is actually when you have an ongoing situation, either terrorism or crime rampage. And that's where we need to be more open, but still with additional protection, right? And even police should have its own, that has happened, is auditing or police forces to make sure that what has been done has been rightly done so. And you even have like then the lawsuit element that will check again if the police did use the right amount of information and so forth. So again, indeed, it's not necessarily a black and white debate, but it's more a debate of how we adjust the needs to what needs to be requested.
I think I mean, it's also another more kind of abstract question, but will the current system of government be in place in 100 years? I mean, like I'm from Ireland, and the Irish state has existed since, there's a big debate, it's a bit of an argument. It's either 1916 or 1922, or 1949, depending on what perspective you're coming from. But that's, that's 100 years. In 500, or even in 50 years, will the approach to government be a little bit different? Because you look at organizations, I don't know if you've come across Aragon, going back to Peter Thiel, he's a big backer of it, but it's effectively decentralized governance, which works very well in sort of civil disputes and civil organizations. But for crime, there's not, or sort of criminal law, there's not really much of a solution for it just yet. But I mean, will governments be approaching and will sort of law and order be approached the same way in 50 years? I mean, I guess that's just an open question. Like, do you think it will be that way?
And we may digress totally.
Yeah.
But what we see in history is that we've seen evolving organization. Like back 10,000 years ago, the main unit of policing and trust was, say, the tribe. Then going to the city-state, and then into the nation-state, which happened with the Industrial Revolution. And now, indeed, maybe because of this information age, we may move into some new forms while all the other ones are still there. You'll still have nation-states, you'll still have cities, like Tallinn, and you still have your tribe or your group of close friends, and then you'll still have your family. But the whole interaction of that may evolve, and then maybe we'll have something above, I don't know. But it's a possibility. But this is a total digression.
Yeah, we're not going
to write a book of it.
I think it's like an interesting and not totally off-topic topic. That what is the role that government plays in protecting us, or what do we play in protecting ourselves? Or is it more about the way we decide to behave, whether it's online or in our normal lives, or is it about the government to protect us, to step in and make that regulation?
It's an interesting question, but I don't know if there is a clear answer. If you look at the promising Generation R, they were called this morning by Lewis, but I don't mind which generation, but cryptocurrency is a good example. Giving the power to hold your own money, do what you like, no banks, decentralized. That's all fabulous stuff, but if it fails, and I know because I work for a cryptocurrency as well, IOTA. If it fails, and we had a failure not related to us, but people lost hundreds of thousands of euros because of an error they made themselves, who are you going to revert to? And that's the issue with decentralization. With great power comes great responsibility, they say. And I don't think that everybody in a society is ready for that at this stage. So if we do that, fine. But is the government then responsible? To be honest, we should leave the government a bit alone. We don't like to be controlled by government unless it fails. And then it's now the government's problem. It's either you steer away from governmental control, or either you accept all the disadvantages from it. And we are not ready for that, I think, today.
Like, I guess it depends where you lie in the political, ideological scale as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's not black and white. It's,
No.
There's different people have different views on this stuff, and you've got people on the sort of extreme libertarian end, and then you've got sort of more authoritarian believers, and
I don't want to pressure any kind of political debate. We only have a couple minutes left, so I would, take a question from the crowd. We've got one here.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
You talked about more educating the users about the risk and the safety. In our current world it's too complex. I'm software developer, but for example, I have to rely, I use OpenSSL, I have to rely on the library. I don't have the time to decompile it, to study every aspect of this, and to make sure that there's something malicious in that. I can only build my trust on that. How many other people are also trusting that library? This comes back to the research of Facebook. I didn't join Facebook also. I didn't like that. But more and more people use the real name, and then eventually I accepted that this is the way I'm supposed to use this. Some benefits, but some risks, and eventually enough people are using this. I'm trusting the community.
Yeah.
And maybe if there is something malicious, I know somebody from that community will voice something, and I get the feedback. But the idea that was proposed that we should educate more about the people, now that's not possible because the work is too complex.
Well,
We cannot teach everybody on every subject.
Thank you.
I'll respond to that. Good question. But I'll say the following. There are different ways that we have trust in organizations or behavior and so forth. So either you have people, you trust in people who do that, guarantors, and indeed, so you mimic what other people have done, or credential organization that have done the job for you to understand what's going on, and are professional organizations that are going to do that. And all that is fine, but it's very limited in the sense that if you really want to build resilience, and you go at the heart of resilience, resilience means there is autonomy on each of the different users. It means that each of the different users maintain their critical reasoning. Now you're going to tell me, yeah, but Guy, it's way too complex, complex world and so forth. That's why I'm saying two things. A, as any users, and it's the same when you are in corporate world and people tell you about technologies, you actually don't need to understand very precisely how it works, but you need to know the effects. And you need to know how the effects is going to impact your business when it's corporate world, or your life when it's your personal world. And that is not properly laid out. And that needs to be properly laid out. And B, we are developing technologies of simulation, of artificial intelligence, that could actually, maybe it's sci-fi, but let's have this discussion 10 years from now, that maybe will help the users to understand what is going on. Back in the early 2000s, there was this term that I loved about infomediaries. That would be some sort of data lawyer that will help manage the data for you and extract value. Never worked out because people did not really realize what is the value at stake. But if instead of looking at the monetary impact, we would look more at what would be the impact in your life of all this data that you're using, and would have a new generation of so-called intermediaries, then I'm sure right now, after the Facebook debate, there will be the one most important thing that could help develop this type of technologies. There would be a market.
No.
You guys have a final comment on this?
Yeah, well, I like your question as well. Of course, awareness is one part. I started awareness in 2004, and then 5 years later, I concluded this is not working. I had another 5 years of thinking, and then I came up, we need first aid. We need cybersecurity first aid situations. What do we do when the incident is there? Be able to respond, and you're right, I mean, OpenSSL, the heartbleed issue, but if you had first aid, you would be able to stop the bleeding perhaps a bit. You knew where the libraries were used and then act upon it and what to do correctly. So I think we need to find the next step in awareness, not thinking about the prevention, but how to do the response, build in kill switches that users easily can manipulate, and perhaps take decisions to take some systems offline from time to time. It doesn't hurt if you're not online, you know? The fear of missing out is an illusion. So don't worry about that. And to come back on Facebook, I'm also on Facebook. It has nothing to do with trust, but more with peer pressure. And of course I use my own name, but that's about it. I'm anyhow doxed if you type in my name. So on that level, it's fine, let's say.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you coming up. And thank you, audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.